some vulnerabilities in DeFi protocols because of their governances, and I'm glad to have the chance to share that with you. I'm head of research in Blockful, where we look at coordination as our main goal. So broad scope of things, that's what's been taking us into governance and into DAOs. And we're basically a big group of gov nerds, where we see over the last few years, we were exploring AI for governance, we were exploring reputation systems for non-plutocratic governance, and, well, being service providers on a few different DAOs, we started finding some of the vulnerabilities that we're going to bring. The idea of what we look at is governance security, so beyond code audits. Not only a faulty code can destroy your system, but also anyone playing inside the rules that gets to manipulate the rules for their own profit. One of the nice things that we've been feeling during this time as we're building this is to make those governance systems resilient and trustless. And to see the Trustless Manifesto published recently was a very good nudge that we're working in the right direction and that it makes sense to work towards this defense beyond just centralization. So governance exposes some risks, but it's what allows us to make our systems resilient. So we need to also make governance resilient so those systems can benefit from that part. If you haven't read this article, super recommend you do. Like it's worth one. And the main goal here is to create effective ways to measure the trustlessness of a system in a way that we can standardize. That's how we've been working towards analyzing those risks. And well, let's jump into it. The goal is to always find an attack before it appears, right? When you're trying to make defense, especially when we're talking on a code level, if it's too late, no way to go back. And the first moment we found that let us start looking into it was the ENS DAO last year. We realized that the delegated supply on ENS DAO was just too small to make sense with the size of the treasury. The voting power was too cheap, the treasury was too big, and we were like, okay, why is no one arbitraging this? Turns out that just because they hadn't realized. ENS was sitting at $120 million without counting their own tokens on the treasury, so that's just ETH and stables. And the total possible voting power at the moment was worth $65 million. The voting power that was actually being used was of about 24. So let's say $25 million, take 120 million home. That's a good arbitrage. I would take it if I didn't care for protecting the DAO also. But not only economically viable attacks are the risk, but also ways that make them cheaper and make those attacks even more profitable. ENS, as one of the examples of the things in ENS DAO that would make this easier, is their governance implementation for voting delays. So whenever a proposal goes to vote, between proposing and start voting, there is a voting delay. That's where you have time to actually discuss the proposal, to actually get more aligned delegates to join this delegation pool and vote. And on ENS, it became quite clear that having a weak governance stack and bad economic conditions is going to make for an easy attack. So we need to look at the weak governance stack, because bad economic conditions just go up and down. We're all in crypto for a while. We know that the bear market just comes tomorrow or next month, and suddenly all your token prices are down, and your stables on the treasury remain the same. Suddenly the arbitrage is worth it. Basically, at this point, we keep monitoring ENS DAO. There's still a very good arbitrage to make, but now with a stack that has a security council in place, a vetoing body composed of different entities that can look at a proposal and say, this is a drain. We're not playing this game. This proposal doesn't go through. So it would just be a waste of cash to try to arbitrage that. There's also a full case of how we solved this, if anyone is interested to look at this one. But this is old news, right? Like DAOs have problems, people don't vote, treasuries get robbed, yeah? But this is how we say things when we're in a normalcy bias perspective, right? Like, oh, it's not going to happen in my DAO. It's not on the stacks that I use. We're just too big to fail. We're safe. And, well, we all know how this goes on that story. But on DAO so far, this has led to some problems. And currently, it's on DeFi DAOs also starting to show up. as we're analyzing. I bet it's been there for a while, but no one has been really looking too much into governance security. So over Ethereum's time life, we have about $500 million stolen directly inside the rules of a DAO, either by getting the DAOs to buy back your tokens or just transfer the treasury to me. Different strategies, same result. DAO loses money, open source stops getting funded, DeFi pools and incentives get drained, and someone gets really rich hidden somewhere in the world. But in the last 12 months, as we started looking into this, we've already solved the ENS case with the $150 million total loss that we could have had there, and have over the last year since then identified something that is even more worrisome for us, that is attacks on protocols, vulnerabilities on protocols that actually control true governance user funds, right? Like have access to change oracles, to move, not nice things to see while you're researching, and we found up to $4 billion so far at the highest point of the curve for beautiful bull market. It was at a $4 billion exposure total, which is not money we want to lose from our users. Looking at all these attacks, we identified patterns. We're trying to work those in standards. So this is also an invitation for all security nerds to reach out, join. We're talking with the EF on how to push this further, and one of the requirements is for us to work with a broader amount of teams. We cannot be creating standards by ourselves because we might be blindsided in some point. So everyone who wants to look into how do we standardize governance security through we're governance nerds, we need more security nerd perspective in some of our flaws here. It's very welcome to join. But what we came up to with this was a framework for analysis and defense. Based on 4 different verticals, we're looking at economic conditions, token distribution, governance implementation, and activity. Economic conditions is basically, is it profitable, right? Does it cost more than it has in the treasury? Then I'm not going to do it. That goes to also token distribution, that is understanding if the power can even be acquired, like, oh, it costs 10 million to rob 150, but the liquidity is 1 million. So then you have to slowly compound your attack until you're ready, and that's what we want to identify before it happens. The governance implementation, so things that could make it much easier. So can your governor contract be spammed? Can I make 10,000 proposals on mainnet, and now I have to vote for one for it to pass, and delegates have to vote no on 10,000, and let's see how that goes for you to defend. And governance activity. So not only are those tokens available to defend, but are they actually paying attention? Are the investors in the US allowed to cast their votes? Or are they going to have regulatory trouble and let the DAO go down just not to get this trouble? So all of those things matter when we're measuring how we defend those treasuries. Oops, this is repeated. And the challenge here is not only to solve this, because solving this is easy. Put it on a foundation. Let them call the shots. Now they can just veto everything. But you lose a lot of the things that make it worth it doing, right? You lose trustlessness, you lose resiliency. Now you're bound to the laws of the country where that foundation sits. You're bound to incompetence in a centralized entity or corruption, whatever. You all know why we do things in a decentralized manner. And we believe that getting holders to take part is the way here. When we say holders, we're not talking like millions of people in retail. We're talking understanding alignment with stakeholders and investors that if you are holding millions of dollars on a DAO token, that governance is what keeps your assets safe. So, okay, you want to put at liquidity provider 60% of what you have, but leave 40% at a delegate you see alignment with. Find a security team and hire them to represent you, or get that that voting power you have being useful for the security of the DAO, not just to make a small LP fee that's not really going to move your needle. The thing is, a few in the DAOs today can already make decisions alone. Both ENS and Uniswap need not many delegates of the top ranking to pass things. And right now we're just lucky that those are not abusing their powers. Some of those are centralized exchanges. Some of those are early investors or early contributors. But, well, it's still just lucky that they don't change alignments, that they don't move for their own benefit instead of the collective. Beyond that, a lot of power sits on centralized exchanges, and that's how most of the attacks we've mapped came to be. It's basically much harder to identify 10,000 wallets getting $5,000 from like from a few successes, and then getting suddenly everyone delegates and votes and proposes at the same time. And when you see the attack is set, voting power has been counted, there's not enough voting power to counteract, and you're gonna sit and watch for the 7 days of the process how we cry about the destruction of the DAO that's been built for years. And even worse than that, in my opinion, is to see delegates that have that delegation, that have an investor, that have a big holder that are behind them saying like, hey, you can represent me, that you can keep the DAO safe, and both on Compound and Uniswap, most of those top delegates don't vote. This is starting to change on Uniswap, curiously, with Duna now being legally compliant, apparently encourages investors to participate. Who would have said? But on Comp specifically, we see Humpy, that's like the Comp attacker. He's been trying for over a year, doing his moves, trying to take power. He's more active than most of the other delegates, and that's just absurd in my perspective. Those conditions together, we've been calling it the quorum crisis. The quorum crisis is an absurd lack of participation in DAOs that makes, although the market cap is bigger than the treasury, the active market cap is just, can be ignored. And they leave us exposed. And if we're exposed, we have to assume Lazarus knows. Those types of attacks, they've taken $500 million. Wow, okay, I find a lot of money, but compared to scale of attacks over all time, that's not that much. But if this becomes a pattern, on our research has been pointing so many of those different DAOs exposed, it could be like a serial thing if we find if more qualified actors get to play. So we have to see the risk before the problem. Just like we saw it on ENS, we're now seeing it on Compound. Compound faces a very similar situation of what we were talking before, but in an even worse position. While the treasury is big and delegated supply and active supply are small, not only that is going on, but Compound, different from ENS, has a governance that has access to the protocol itself. The commits are owned and commanded by the governor. So that means that the capture here is not only draining 150 million, this could touch way more money, not only the treasury DAO money, but my money, your money. That is another level of an issue. And it's been fought against. There are people in Compound DAO trying to call that attention, trying to make that move to change that. But at the same time, we still see that Humpy, the leader of the adversarial coalition, the red teamer here, he has more voting power right now than the average turnout. So recently he was able to block by himself, or we say by himself, I don't know what are those wallets, but let's say it's this coalition of Humpy. It's been able to block a proposal to fund the Guardian Council, the guys that have veto power. So if he attacks, now the guys that have to veto him, they just didn't get the funding because he said no. And this council has to be renewed next year. And maybe he can say no again. This is his public power. We don't know how much he holds in any centralized exchange. We don't know what addresses that are laying dormant are also theirs. We're still to find that. And if any of you is Humpy, please let's chat. We saw that last year in one of the attacks that happened there. We mapped that, saw what was going on. In the end, he passed the proposal and accepted a new product from the DAO to cancel it himself. He could have taken over, and he didn't. So this is a complex actor to understand. But the opening is still there, and we don't deal with trust. We deal with making guarantees that our systems work and are not capturable out of thin air. So we have to assume that Lazarus knows, Lazarus being a generalistic attacker symbol here, but is an attacker that is well-funded, that is creative, that's smart, and that knows that we are all normalcy biased. No, nothing's gonna happen, we're all safe. We literally get in touch with DAOs and say like, hey guys, you are at risk. And they look at us and say now, nah, we're fine, believe us, like we got some defenses you haven't seen. And I hope they do, but I find that it's more of an ego and overconfidence thing than anything else. The thing is, it's not only getting that 51% supply, there's many other ways to make it cheaper. So even if you're at 1-to-1, well, let me drain it, lose money out of the drain compared to my costs, but then I'll short the drop and I'll have borrowed something. Like, you can start compiling mechanisms and even like in an unfavorable condition, still profit on top of an attack like this. And if we assume that Lazarus knows, it means that we have to know too. And knowing ahead of time is what we've been trying to make possible. We've been trying to put up solutions with some of the DAOs that we are working with. This work has been mostly funded by Uniswap Foundation and ENS DAO to try to start making ways for people to know. Those things I'm going to show are all public and free to use. If you're interested in keeping an eye on that, feel free to go for it. The first one is a system to evaluate economic and systemic risks. So we have security stages, risk areas, and we're mapping that on a dashboard that we're indexing the data ourselves so we don't have to trust anyone on the way. Oopsie, this is buggy. Notification system, so you can keep track of different changes in voting power, keeping track of your delegate if they're not voting, because we see that delegates that are inactive are one of the main issues, but also the people that keep their delegation with people who are inactive. So just making sure people know when they can change it. And designing new incentive systems so we can bring holders to care on governance again, to delegate again. We know it's kind of unfair to ask people to say like, hey, leave your money here, not making any profit, so we can keep this thing safe. So there are ways that should be explored around how we can incentivize this type of action. Basically, it's dangerous out there in governance. The idea is to make this anti-capture framework so we can all apply it on different spaces. Again, this is an invitation to join and collaborate. We're really looking forward to expand this now beyond the models we look. We want to be able to look at Lido, Aave, and Sky that are the three main ones that we are not being able to cover because of the changes of models. We want to make something that is standardized and can be replicated. So it's taking our time to get to there, but we're already mapping Compound and Uniswap mostly, and TVL. Those are the ones that matter the most that we're looking. Basically, yeah, we're looking at a few DAOs in a few different ways with the goal of making it legible and making things that you need to look in a contract easier to see and track, and finding the risks before they're critical, saying like how, for example, if there's a big change on how the money from the supply on centralized exchanges drops a lot and delegated supply goes up fast, that is a good signal you should pay attention to what the fuck's happening. That's it. Governance was never easy. And quoting from the Trustless Manifesto, we choose to build trustless systems even when it's harder. We hope other people do too. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.